Hi, welcome to Danny After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight, I'll be featuring the case of Stephanie Lazarus. So let's go ahead and find out more. Let's go ahead and dive on in. Stephanie Lazarus was born in 1960. Now, not a lot is known in the research before she started her career, so where we're going to pick up is when she joined the police force. For the first 2 years, started off as a patrol officer. In the course of her career, she became involved with the DARE program as one of their training officers. For those of us from that generation, we certainly remember going through the DARE program. She was then treasurer for the Los Angeles Women Police Officers Association for 5 years. She helped fundraise to provide reliable, around-the-clock childcare for parents who worked on the force. At one point, she even started her own private investigation company called Unique Investigations. After over 20 years of being dedicated on the force, she was promoted to the high-profile, high-stakes art theft detail, which tracked stolen art and art forgeries. Now we're going to go back a little to February 24th, 1986. A woman named Sherry Rasmussen was a critical care nurse and lived in her condominium with her new husband of 3 months, John Rutan. John was the ex-boyfriend of Stephanie Lazarus. Well, that night, John got home and found his new wife beaten to death. She was shot numerous times with a .38 caliber revolver. There were also deep bite marks left by the attacker on Sherry's arms. This crime was initially viewed by police as a robbery gone wrong. They determined that because Sherry's BMW vehicle was stolen. Sherry's family was adamant they did not buy this theory, not from the beginning. The most outspoken was Sherry's dad, Nell. What he said was he didn't have a name, but he knew that one of his son-in-law's ex-girlfriends had been giving Sherry a big problem. What Nell told the police was, quote, "She told me that John's ex-girlfriend had come to her office at the hospital, dressed provocatively, and confronted Sherry about John, and said that if she couldn't have John, nobody could. And she said, if this marriage doesn't work out, I want you to know that I'll be waiting to pick up the pieces," end quote. At the time, Sherry came home one day as well and found the ex-girlfriend waiting for her. But she wasn't just waiting for her. She was inside the condominium. She was wearing her police uniform. And then just a few days before the murder, Sherry had told her father that the ex-girlfriend had allegedly called and threatened her. She told her father she thought this ex-girlfriend police officer had been stalking her. At the time, Sherry's father's investigations, all the allegations that he provided to the police, went nowhere. He pleaded, he begged for the department to take a second look. This couldn't just be a robbery gone wrong, but it went unheeded. So after 5 years, he gave up. At the time of the initial investigation, all of John's ex-girlfriends had been interviewed. So Stephanie Lazarus was interviewed by police, but she wasn't viewed a likely suspect, so they never pursued it. So the case of the murder of Sherry Rasmussen went unsolved for 23 years. Now we get to February 2009. The cold case detective squad decided to reinvestigate the case. The investigators discovered female DNA from that bite mark on Sherry's body. In looking through all of the suspect lists, they determined they had a prime suspect. And that prime suspect was Stephanie Lazarus. They followed her for days, and she eventually discarded a cup in the trash, and they retrieved it to test it for DNA. The detectives were able to match Stephanie's DNA from that cup to the DNA found in the bite mark on Sherry's body. So they placed her under arrest on June 5th, 2009. Well, at the time of the murder, Stephanie had only been on the force for 2 years. She was just a patrol officer. So police needed to interview her. They needed to get more information. So what they did was Stephanie was at work, sitting in her third floor office, when she was told by other police officers that there was a suspect in custody that might have information on one of her art theft cases. So she left to go check in on that suspect. In accordance with their policy, to get through the jail security, she would have had to surrender her weapons prior to getting into that interrogation room. That was planned. So she walks through the security point, again, surrenders her weapons, and at this point she's confronted by robbery homicide detectives who say, quote, "Stephanie, we need to talk to you," end quote. So Stephanie still doesn't put 2 and 2 together and sits down in front of a hidden camera, still thinking she's waiting for the subject that she needs to talk about her art theft. Now, I have some quotes from the interrogation of the detectives and Stephanie that I'm going to read. And as it picks up, you can tell when Stephanie finally, it starts to click. Now, detectives say, "Do you know John Roten?" Stephanie says, "Yes. I mean, we dated. What is this about?" Detective, "Well, it's relating to his wife." Stephanie, "Okay." Detective, "Did you know her?" Stephanie, "Not really." Detective, "Did you ever meet her?" Stephanie, "I don't know." Detective, "You dated John. How long did you guys date?" This is when it's finally starting to click. Stephanie says, "I mean, why are you guys, is this something, you said it was going to be about art. I don't understand why you're talking about some guy I dated a million years ago." Detectives, "Well, do you know what happened to his wife?" Stephanie, "Yeah, I know. She got killed." Detectives, "Well, one of the concerns I had as we're looking at some of the notes is some of Sherry's friends said that you and her were having problems because of the John situation, and words were being exchanged, and it's all relating to John." Stephanie now starts to get choked. She responds, "You know what? I can't say." Detectives, "You can't say?" Stephanie, "No, that doesn't even ring a bell." Finally, an hour into the interrogation, detectives, they've had enough. So they start to ask tougher, to the point questions. Detective says, "Did you ever fight with her?" Stephanie, "You mean like we fought?" Detective, "Did you ever duke it out with her?" Stephanie, "No, I don't think so." Detective, "You'd remember that, right?" Stephanie, "Yeah, I would think so." And then she responds again. "I mean, if you guys are claiming I'm a suspect, then I got a problem with that. I'm shocked. I'm really shocked that somebody would blame saying that I did this. I mean, we had a fight, and so I went and killed her. I mean, come on." That is the end of the quotes from the interrogation that I have. Now, what then happened was Stephanie then decides she's going to walk out of the room. And she does, only to then be arrested and handcuffed. She was brought back into the interrogation room to be read her Miranda rights. Those words she knows all too well. After Stephanie's arrest, new details emerge. One key piece to the puzzle was missing, and that was the gun that was used to shoot Sherry multiple times in the chest. Well, the Los Angeles Times reported that Stephanie had called the Santa Monica Police Department a few weeks before the murder to report, well, her car was broken into by the Santa Monica Pier. There were items in her car that were stolen: a gym bag, money, clothes, and her .38 caliber handgun. The police now believe that she ditched the gun in the Pacific Ocean. So now Stephanie Lazarus goes to trial, and that trial began early 2012. Prosecutors believed that the motive that Stephanie had for the murder was jealousy over Sherry's relationship with her ex-boyfriend, John Rutan. The prosecutors stated, quote, "A bite, a bullet, a gun barrel, and a broken heart. That's the evidence that will prove to you that defendant Stephanie Lazarus murdered Sherry Rasmussen," end quote. On June 9th, 2009, Stephanie appeared in court in an orange jumpsuit, appearing distressed, her eyes wide open. Stephanie spoke just once, answering the judge about the continuance, and said, quote, "Yes, Your Honor," end quote. During testimony heard prior to the sentencing, John Rutan was there, and he said, quote, "The fact that Sherry's death occurred because she met me and married me brings me to my knees," end quote. John Rutan would finally admit that he had sex with Stephanie after he became engaged to Sherry. He testified that he was so enraged and she was so upset that she began to cry, and she begged him, "Don't get married." So what he did was they had sex that same day. He said he still wanted to go through with his wedding just a few weeks later, but he wanted his affair to end. The prosecutor throughout the 5-week trial had more than 60 witnesses testify, and 400 exhibits were presented from the state and the defense. On March 9th, 2012, after a little more than only a day of deliberation, Stephanie was found guilty in Sherry's murder, first degree. She was later sentenced in May 2012 to 27 years to life in prison. She will be eligible for parole in 2039. And that is the case of Stephanie Lazarus. Thank you for sticking around for another episode of Danny After Dark. Do you have a question or comment about the case? Well, leave it down below. Let's be interactive. Do you have a suggestion for a case that you'd like me to cover? Well, leave it down below, and you may see it featured on an upcoming episode. Until next time, remember, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us.